Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Vidjagameguy here, and as promised, it's time for my Class 1A versus 1B arc review for My Hero Academia Season 5. And this arc had very low expectations from everything going around, so it was a pleasant surprise for me that I actually enjoyed this arc quite a lot. I really liked seeing all of Class 1B's quirks and the growth of both classes' characters. There were some really interesting strategies and quirk interplay, like combos and stuff. And I definitely can see how this arc would have been hard to read in manga form, though, as I definitely feel it benefited from having fights in two 20-minute chunks, and in Bakugo's case, like 10 minutes. Instead of a lot of weekly chapters, because some of these fights could have gone on for like over a month in the manga possibly, and I imagine that would have been a miserable experience. But yeah, while I did really enjoy this arc, it does have a few issues that I want to get through real quick before we get into the nitty-gritty of all the good stuff. And my main issue with this arc is the obvious padding for time. This is the first season of My Hero Academia to suffer from some major recap and flashback issues, in my opinion, and I think that this is pretty obvious to everyone, because I've seen multiple people mention this. It wasn't a huge deal, except for, in my opinion, the best example of this, which is episode 11, which is where the first 3 minutes of the episode are OP and recap, maybe a little bit more than that, and then another significant portion of the episode is multiple what I felt were unnecessary flashbacks. And I don't know, the manga's pretty far ahead, I thought, so I wouldn't think we're that close to catching up, so I'm not sure why they're doing this, but hopefully it's so that they don't have to do it in the next arc, because, everybody says that that's going to be the best arc ever, but we'll see. Other than that issue, though, which I feel everybody noticed, I didn't have many issues with this arc. I understand that a lot of people think Class B is irrelevant, and they kind of are, but that didn't bring down this season, in my opinion. But if you have any other reasons you didn't enjoy this arc, feel free to leave a comment, like and subscribe, and leave that comment down below on why you didn't enjoy it. But, well, on to the actual start of the arc. And the arc starts out by getting into the aftermath of the High-End Nomu fight with a confrontation between Dabian and Endeavor, which leads to the Dabi moment, which I found pretty interesting. I mean, we all know where that one's leading, probably. I mean, it's pretty obvious, but I haven't read the manga, obviously, but, it's pretty obvious that everyone thinks that Dabi's the son or whatever, but that's probably the case. On the other end, though, we learn that Hawks is working to infiltrate the League of Villains, but passing off as a sympathizer to their cause, which leads into some interesting characterization for Hawks, and is definitely going to be an issue in the future, and continue to put stress on our little boy Hawks. Then we get a look into the One for All, and more information on All for One in the beginning of One for All, that is, and, this was extremely interesting, and while yes, All for One is an evil asshole who definitely took advantage of people and takes advantage of people, I don't think that all of his points are invalid. What about the people whose quirks destroy their lives? What about the people who don't have quirks? It's always been very clear that Hero Society has a lot of issues. All for One is just pointing out those issues and using them to his advantage. Yes, he's evil and needs to be stopped, but that doesn't mean he isn't right about some of the problems with the system. And I find that to be both fascinating and show his cunning and villainy. Which then, of course, leads into the foreshadowing that we're not going to even talk about because we already know where that leads, and I'm going to get to all that later when we get to that episode. Then we can get into the meat and potatoes of the arc, the fights. Which, before we talk about the actual fights, we need to address Shinzo. Bringing Shinzo back was definitely a shock to me. While he left a big impression on a lot of other people as a character, I didn't think he left that big of an impression. I think his argument for having a quirk that a lot of people would associate with villainy was interesting, but other than that, he wasn't that big a deal to me. But that doesn't change the fact that I am really glad that they brought him back, and I think bringing him back was a great decision. His quirk is interesting, and making Aizawa his mentor was a really cool idea, because they do have, like, kind of similar, they use their quirks in, like, a similar vein. And while I wouldn't say he was that much of a standout in this arc, in my opinion, he is more interesting than a lot of the 1A mainstays, so it's cool to see him back, and I'm interested to see where they go with him. On that note, let's talk about the fight in which Shinzo is part of Class A's team. I think that this fight was a great start in showing what to expect from this arc, but also not, throwing our proportions out of the waters. We saw some interesting strategies and some cool new quirks, and how people are improving their quirks, such as Air Prison Guy. I thought the Beast Guy was an interesting character too. We also get an idea for the animation of this quality of this season through that awesome shot with, like, Kaminari going through the Beast Guy and all that stuff. And speaking of Kaminari, this was definitely his time to shine. We got to see him actually show off some brains and try to take charge, which was really great. I also think this fight did a great job of showing how effective Shinzo is just by being in the environment, even if he doesn't do anything. And while this fight didn't blow me away, it was very good and entertaining, and showed the potential that this arc had. And then there was the second fight, which I definitely didn't expect much of this fight to be interesting, besides Tokiyami. This fight felt like it was revolving around Momo, who I just personally don't find that interesting. I know other people do, but I just don't find her that interesting. So I didn't expect much from this fight. But the first part of the fight primarily focused on the Shadow Guy, and Tokiyami was super cool. I think Tokiyami's new technique, Dark Fallen Angel or whatever, is a super cool application of Dark Shadow. And it's funny how it's explained as he can fly because Dark Shadow is literally just, like, carrying him. It's a really fascinating... It always brings the question, can a stand carry around their stand user from, like, JoJo's or stuff like that, which is really interesting. And I also loved the flashback with Hawks, speaking of the new technique. I mean, this idea that Hawks just pissed Tokiyami off so much because he felt like he was just being used for information... And all this ultimately culminating in Hawk's talk with Tokiyami to nudge him towards his full potential and new technique is great. And I think a really interesting take on, like, a aspiring hero relationship and how that can be a tense relationship. This leads me to Mushroom Girl and the way her quirk was used at the end, which was terrifying. It's a practical application, and I definitely agree she needed to use it to win, but it really shows how deadly some of these quirks could be in a specific way, and also shows that these kids aren't playing around. It could be considered too far, but I think it's an interesting escalation that actually reaches its climax in the third round, where a lot of the students take some serious damage. Yeah. So other than the Tokiyami and Shadow Guy stuff, and of course the Mushroom Girl, the rest of this fight was just okay. The Momo Kendo stuff just isn't that interesting to me personally, though I find Kendo more compelling, and her desire to prove her worth versus Momo, as now they're kind of grouped in the same thing, was very interesting. And I will say that I love Comic Guy's quirk, like Manga Fukidashi. That guy's quirk is freaking hilarious. I get such a kick out of him just screaming onomatopoeias and stuff, and it reminds me of a lot of Echo's Act 1 and 2 from Part 4 of JoJo's. So I would put this fight on the same tier as the first one. The third fight blew my mind, especially since I wasn't expecting it to, and the fourth fight too, for different reasons, and these two fights are the peak of the arc in my opinion. And I made a completely different video that's going to be up here in the iCard, which is right after those episodes came out, just talking about those, because they're incredible, and it's an entire 10-minute video, or 9-minute video or something, just completely on the awesomeness that was those two episodes. So I'm not going to talk about those here, just go watch that video. It'll also be linked in the description. And then there's the last round, and I have to say I was actually really disappointed by the last fight in this arc. The reveal of multiple quirks and founders living in one brawl is super freaking cool and awesome, and I am so excited for that. I find that so cool. But the problem is besides that, this last fight was very lackluster, and it definitely doesn't help that it felt very bloated with recap and flashbacks, and as I said earlier in the video, that was one of my main complaints with this arc, and this fight was the main culprit, was a big culprit for that. I mean, the fight had a really cool quirk interplay on Class B's side, but it doesn't change the fact that the fight was kind of boring. It was just a lot of stuff happening, none of which felt super impactful and interesting, just stuff flying around everywhere. I mean, the biggest disappointment being the fight between Deku and Shinzo. Deku barely uses Black Whip and then says he needs to get more control of One For All before he can use it, and which is decent. Like, he needs to scale to use it. Like, I get you don't want to power creep too fast. But then there's just some fun punches thrown, a slow-mo fall to the ground, and, you know, there's that one cool shot of, like, Deku doing the spin, but besides all that, but then the fight's just over. Like, for a fight that felt like it was being hyped up through both the opening and everything, nothing really happened. It just kind of felt disappointing to see, in my opinion. The worst fight in the arc being the last fight in the arc, you know? Like, kind of disappointing. Then we get the usual arc end cap episode where everything just wraps itself up nicely, and Shinzo gets in the hero course. Great. Deku reveals his experience to All Might and Bakugo, which they're all confused by, and Bakugo and Todoroki finally get their provisional licenses and use them to stop the water bad guy in a pretty cool action sequence. And I thought the water bad guy, like the guy who can control carbonation, was pretty freaking cool. Though I agree with something I said where somebody said, and he was like, "Why is this dude not working in the soda industry if he can control carbonation? Like, surely they would pay you millions." But yeah. With next week's episode looking to be a Christmas special, which is ironic because it's finally starting to heat up into the peak of summer where I live, I don't think we're going to get anything like super plot relevant in the next episode that I need to cover besides like maybe an after credits scene to bridge us into the next arc, which everyone says is going to be great. But I'll eat my words and make a video if I'm wrong about the Christmas episode not being plot relevant. But with that, I thoroughly enjoyed this arc, and even though it ended very lackluster in my opinion, and I can't wait to see what happens in the next arc, and I'm sure I'll be making more videos about it. So with all that, thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed for more awesome anime content, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Later.